Trial resumed. Jury not present.
The court said, "Good morning. Would you make your appearances, please?"
Mr. Horton said, "Good morning, Your Honor." Justin Horton, Ryan Finkel, Juliana Murray, Micah Ferguson for the government. We're joined by paralegal Isabel Loftus and Robert Stout from the FBI.
Mr. Kamraju said, "Good morning, Your Honor." Sid Kamraju and Scott Skirick on behalf of Mr. Gov't. My understanding is Mr. Gov't is just in the bathroom.
The court said, "All right. So we'll wait till he comes out. Please be seated."
Defendant present.
The court said, "So last night the defense submitted a letter with respect to hearsay exceptions, which deserves a lot of attention, and I'd like to discuss the 3 hearsay exceptions which they mention. I know that the prosecution has not yet responded to the letter. So the first exception mentioned is statements that are offered for their impact on the defendant, and as an example, defense counsel mentions a conversation concerning misuse of funds. So we had one witness, Mr. Zhou, who spoke about a video conference where the misuse of funds was raised. How is it that Mr. Govt's statements about the misuse of funds would have an impact on him?"
Mr. Kamraju said, "Your Honor, just for the record, Mr. Gov't is now here at counsel's table. I think you have to take those 2 in tandem, Your Honor, the first example we gave and the second example we gave." Example.
The court said, "But I want you to stick with the first."
Mr. Kamraju said, "Okay."
The court said, "Impact on the defendant."
Mr. Kamraju said, "Sure." So an example of that, Your Honor, would be, if the defendant said, "Oh, my gosh. I can't believe the funds were stolen," then that is evidence of the impact that other people's statements had on him.
The court said yes, but we're talking about the witness speaking about Mr. Govt's statements about misuse of funds. That's what I thought you were getting at.
Mr. Kamraju said, "Well, my point, Your Honor, is, in the example I just gave. Mr. Govt's statement was made in response to another party's statement, right? And so his statement is evidence of the impact that the speaker's statement had on him. It caused." In that specific example, and again, as we said in our letter, we're not trying to revisit any of those rulings. But if it caused Mr. Gov't to take an action, right, if it caused him to make a phone call, right. If it caused him to say something or send a direction. That is evidence of impact that it had on Mr. Gov't.
The court said, "So I'd like to hear from the government about that."
Mr. Ferguson said, "Yes, Your Honor. So the way this typically works, this kind of state of mind exception, would be."
The court said, "This is impact on the defendant."
Mr. Ferguson said, "Correct."
The court said yes.
Mr. Ferguson said, which would be someone, an out-of-court declarant, saying something to the defendant. Not the defendant saying something to other people.
The court said yes.
Mr. Ferguson said, "That's the framework."
The court said the word impact. It necessarily means that an individual is the object of something. You are being impacted by, you are receiving the action.
Mr. Kamraju said, "Yes. Yes, Your Honor. But where I'm going is that the statement. The defendant's statement can still be evidence of the impact that someone else's statement has on him, right? I'm not quibbling with the fact that impact suggested a third party's acting in a way that is influencing Mr. Gov't. I'm just saying that Mr. Govt's statement can be evidence of that influence."
Mr. Ferguson said, "Just briefly, Your Honor."
The court said yes.
Mr. Ferguson said, "If that were the rule, or if that were the exception, it would swallow the rule. Because it's hard to imagine a situation where an actor, the defendant, is not speaking in response to something. And so if any time he speaks, it's evidence of his state of mind. Then you're basically disregarding the hearsay rules for anything the defendant said, because you could always say, well, anything he said is reflective of his state of mind. That's not the way the rules of evidence work. It's not how the hearsay rules work. There are cases like the ones they cited where something is said to the defendant and that had an effect on the defendant. Or at least the defense is entitled to argue that it did, and that out-of-court statement comes in. And it's not the case that any time the defendant spoke, It's a reflection of his state of mind, and it can disregard the hearsay rules to have the defendant essentially testify without taking the stand throughout the trial. It's not an opposing party statement, like when the government elicits the defendant's statements. And the hearsay rules preclude them from doing that. It's kind of trial 101, Your Honor.
Mr. Karamaju said, well, so, first of all, I think de Maria addressed that argument that Mr. Ferguson just made. But the state of mind exception, which is not the one that Your Honor was asking about, but the state of mind exception has a carve-out built into it. So that's what Mr. Ferguson is talking about. Your Honor is focused on impact, the impact part of our letter. My point is simply that if there is a statement made by the defendant that is being offered for a reason other than its truth. And so in that case we were using it as an example of impact. But a statement that evinces his desire to do something in response to a statement.
The court said no, but we're talking about a witness who is quoting your client. The witness says, Mr. Gov't said we should investigate the misuse of funds.
Mr. Karamaju said, right.
The court said, so the question is, how does Mr. Govt's statement impact himself?
Mr. Karamaju said, but that, I don't think, respectfully, Your Honor. I don't think our formulation is that Mr. Govt's statement impacts himself. I think our formulation is that Mr. Govt's statement is evidence of the impact that another statement had on him. That's not being offered for the truth, that's being offered for solely the reaction that it caused in Mr. Gov't.
The court said, but in this case, your position is that Mr. Gov't indeed wanted to have an investigation carried out against Sarah Way. And so isn't it being offered for the truth of the matter asserted? That he's directing that an investigation be undertaken, and that's part of your defense?
Mr. Karamaju said, no, Your Honor, because that would fall, in our view, into the second example we gave. Which is an order or direction, and an order or direction is not hearsay.
The court said, well, so we're in the command exception now. I was in the impact exception. So.
Mr. Karamaju said, well, I'm sorry, Your Honor. My apologies. I didn't mean to interrupt.
The court said, go ahead.
Mr. Karamaju said, no. I only brought up the command because Your Honor brought up the concept of investigation of Sarah Way. So that was just the example that we used in connection with the second prong. So that's why I went to the command angle of it.
The court said, right. The statement, I understand that there may be a misuse of funds and that should be investigated. That in and of itself is not a command. If he states, you should investigate it, you must undertake an investigation. That is a command.
Mr. Karamaju said, well, that's what we were trying to elicit, was that he did say this should be looked into.
The court said, I understand the command exception. I just don't comprehend the impact exception that you're making out. And I invite you to submit authority that discusses a defendant's own statement's impact on himself.
Mr. Karamaju said, I don't think I'll have that authority, Your Honor, because that's not our, as I think Your Honor knows. Because that's not our argument.
The court said, well, your argument is that the defendant's statement reflects the impact another person's statement had on him.
Mr. Karamaju said, so maybe I can try to do a clearer example. And I recognize that is not this case. But I'm just trying to use what might be a familiar example. In support of a duress defense, right? A defendant may be able to say, or you may be able to elicit testimony from a third-party witness that another party threatened the defendant unless they took the action that the government charged them with. Right? That could come in as a state of mind, but it could also come in as an example of impact. Now the way the defendant's statement in that scenario might come in is, if the defendant says, oh, no. I'm terrified of that. If they expressed fear, right? That would be evidence of the impact that the threatener's statement is having on the defendant. And that's how you make out a duress defense, right, in the absence of the defendant's testimony. So that's an example of a defendant's statement being an example of the impact that it had on him. Which is our formulation. We're not trying to say that Mr. Govt's statements impacted himself in some way. I recognize that that would be circular.
The court said, okay. So I'll hear from the government with respect to the defense contention that commands are exceptions to the hearsay rule. And I will permit you, of course, to do your own research. I know that you may not have completed that yet.
Mr. Ferguson said, yes, Your Honor. Just as a general matter, that's correct. I think as everyone recognizes, the devil is in the details at times. And just to take an example, the one that we were discussing just a moment ago. Your Honor, a statement like, this should be investigated, that is close to a command but not exactly. The command would be, investigate this. But some kind of general pontificating on this should be investigated is not, I don't think that. You know, we're kind of dealing with these examples on the fly. I don't think that would fall under the command exception. But as a general principle, it is correct, you know. Mr. Kamraju is correct that commands are not hearsay.
The court said, all righty. So I don't recall how, during Mr. Zhou's testimony, any command was dealt with by myself. I just don't recall it in the transcript. And so we can go back and we certainly can alter my ruling to reflect the command exception to the hearsay rule. But I of course invite you to review the transcript and identify where that took place.
Mr. Kamraju said, well, that's fine, Your Honor. We're happy to do it. We're happy to identify the places for the court. We truly intended this to be a prospective issue simply because given the government's hearsay objections, we expect that this is going to come up over and over again. So it's not that we're requesting the court go back and revise any of its rulings. That witness has been excused. We're not asking to call him back or anything like that. Just given what we've seen in the 3500 material, what we anticipate our cross-examination being, and given the government's perspective on hearsay, we just wanted to be clear so that the court had our position for the record.
The court said, all right. So now we go to the state of mind exception. If you could explain your position on that.
Mr. Kamraju said, yes, Your Honor. So the state of mind, so obviously, the case we cited, United States v. De Maria. The state of mind exception is triggered and the defendant's statement is offered to prove their then existing state of mind. It cannot, just by rule, as everyone knows, be used to introduce a statement about a past remembered belief. So from our perspective, if Mr. Gov't made a statement like, I'll use the De Maria example again. So in De Maria, when the agents came to arrest him, the defendant said, why are you guys here? I'm just here to get some cheap cigarettes. So the court in that case said that is indicative of his state of mind for why he thought he was there.
The court said for?
Mr. Kamraju said, why the defendant believes he was there. That was his state of mind, his present existing state of mind for why he was there. So from our perspective, there could be similar testimony where we could cross-examine a witness who might make a statement, for example, about Mawa, right, and Mr. Govt's belief at the time, during the period of the conspiracy, about Mawa and its use. That, and again, we'd have to see what the testimony is, but that would be an example of a state of mind exception.
The court said, so you're saying that if a witness were on the stand and the witness states Mr. Gov't said the premises is used for these given purposes, that statement should come in to show his state of mind?
Mr. Kamraju said, at the time, Your Honor, yes. It cannot come in, if we tried to elicit testimony that said, you know. In 2023 he's reflecting back on a purchase from 2021, we're not saying that is a state of mind exception. But for his present, then existing state of mind, yes.
The court said, I'll hear from the government on that.
Mr. Ferguson said, again, very difficult to deal in the abstract with this, but we are concerned, as we said at the outset, that the defense's interpretation of this exception would swallow the rule such that pretty much anything the defendant said ever, they could elicit through, offer through our witnesses. That's not the way the hearsay exception works. Your Honor. It's very difficult to address it in the abstract, and we haven't had much time to digest their letter. But I think there's a real concern that the exception would swallow the rule.
The court said, so I want to understand when a hearsay statement, an out-of-court statement by Mr. Gov't would not be showing his state of mind. Give me an example of that.
Mr. Kamaraju said, well, I mean, first of all, the rule defines an example of that, right? Which is past recollections. That's one example, right? But let me put it this way. What the government's argument basically collapses to is that the court should read out the state of mind exception because they think it's too broad. That's not the way that works.
The court said, well, the court is trying to figure out when the court should read in the exception.
Mr. Kamaraju said, well, I agree, and as I said, Your Honor, it certainly turns on the particular statement. So my example was one of, during the period of the conspiracy, when they say renovations are happening, right? If Mr. Gov't says, oh, you know, I like this for the G Club's members or whatever, first of all, that's relevant, right? And secondly, it shows his then existing state of mind during a relevant time period, not in the past. We're not talking about future action, which is a separate hearsay exception. We're talking about at that moment in time, that's what Mr. Gov't believes, right? So to me, trying to determine what is read in, and Your Honor is right, you can't do that in the abstract. But I think the example I just gave, then it is very clearly then existing state of mind.
The court said, we'll revisit this. We'll revisit this. And of course the government will have an opportunity to submit authority on this, and of course I invite you, Mr. Kamaraju, to submit any further authority to guide the court.
Mr. Kamaraju said, I appreciate that, Your Honor, and I'll certainly try.
The court said, is there anything else before we have the jurors come in?
Mr. Kamaraju said, not from the defense, Your Honor.
Mr. Ferguson said, it's not, I don't believe it's pressing before the jury comes in, Your Honor. But the defense did submit a motion for reconsideration of Your Honor's expert rulings. You know, I think we would ask to have at least until Monday to file a response to that, Your Honor.
The court said, that's fine.
Mr. Ferguson said, and secondly, just one housekeeping matter that I will keep short. I think given the schedule, we probably won't get to the testimony of Mr. Shemel Medrano. He's a summary witness of the government, introducing a large volume of videos and G News posts. That was the subject of our letter that Your Honor ruled on yesterday. He's introducing a summary chart that's a little over 200 pages. And we prepared hard copy binders for the court, for the jury, for defense, and also for the court reporters. That we would, I don't think we'll get to his testimony today, but wanted to just alert the court to that, you know, prior to his testimony. We might want to put those binders underneath the jurors' chairs or hand them out at the beginning. If that was all right with Your Honor.
The court said, that's fine.
Mr. Ferguson said, the one other thing with that testimony is there's so many exhibits that we'll be offering pursuant to stipulations that we're grateful for the defense in helping us reach agreement on. That we were hoping to hand out just a page listing out all the government exhibits so the court reporter and the court can follow along while I read them out. If that is also all right with Your Honor.
The court said, very handy. Thank you.
Mr. Ferguson said, thank you, Your Honor.
The court said, we are going to have our sidebars on this side of the bench going forward.
Mr. Kamaraju said, that makes sense to us, Your Honor. It's a little close to the witness and the jury otherwise.
The court said, all right. So we will return at 9:30.
All counsel said, thank you, Your Honor.
Recess.
Mr. Horton said, Your Honor, if I may just raise something briefly before the jury comes in.
The court said, go ahead.
Mr. Horton said, we were handed a document a moment ago that we understand the defense intends to offer through Ms. Maistrello. It is a document that post-dates her employment. We don't think there's any way that she can authenticate it. It post-dates her employment. There's no author indicated on the document except Golden Spring Limited. It appears to be a corporate document. So setting aside the authentication issue, although that's, of course, a threshold issue, This is a two-page statement of the defendant's agent. It's exactly the kind of hearsay that we've been talking about. And it's clearly offered for its truth. It's a two-page explanation of the purpose of the security team at Golden Spring. So we want to bring that to the court's attention and object to it.
The court said, so is the defense planning to use it to refresh her recollection?
Mr. Horton said, well, it post-dates her employment, Anne.
The court said, yes, but anything can be used to refresh a recollection.
Mr. Horton said, of course. I understand.
The court said, that would, of course, be the only reason that document could be put before the witness, and I know that Ms. Schroff knows that.
Ms. Schroff said, I do know that, Your Honor. That is exactly what I would use the document for. Thank you.
The court said, okay. All righty. Please have the jurors brought in.
Continued on next page. Jury present.
Ms. Schroff said, Your Honor, I believe we're missing one person.
The court said, the witness? Yes, the witness will also come in. Good morning, jurors.
The juror said, good morning.
The court said, welcome back. Please be seated. Good morning. And remember that you're still under oath. You may continue with the cross-examination.
Ms. Schroff said, thank you, Your Honor.
Karin Maistrello, resumed. Cross-examination continued. By Ms. Schroff.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You testified on direct, right, that you were going to refer to Mr. Gov's boss through these proceedings. Correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection.
The court said, sustained.
And Mr. Gov't also went by the name Ho-Won Kwok, correct?
Yes.
Would you keep your voice up for me, please?
I'll do my best.
Thank you. And the name Ho-Won Kwok is his Hong Kong name, correct?
Cantonese name.
Right. It's his Cantonese name, right?
Yes.
You can just pull that towards you if you want, the microphone.
No, I'm good.
And that's the name that appears on his Hong Kong passport, correct?
I do not remember.
Well, you made travel arrangements for him, right?
I did.
You made hotel bookings for him, correct?
Not with his name.
I cannot hear you.
The court said, all righty. So shall we try the handheld microphone instead then?
Not using his name.
Not using the name Ho-Won Kwok?
I never used his name to make reservations.
Okay. And you knew that he had a political asylum in the name of Ho-Won Kwok, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
I do not remember the name used.
You knew he had a political asylum application pending, correct?
Yes.
Mr. Horton said, objection, relevance.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
Now it's fair to say, right, that your employee contract was with Golden Springs, correct?
Golden Spring.
And you testified on direct that when you took the job, your understanding was that Golden Spring was a managed asset management company, correct?
Yes.
And at the time that you took the job, nobody told you where those assets came from, correct?
That's correct.
And you did not know whether the assets came from the Middle East, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
I did not know.
And you knew at some point that the assets came from Golden Spring, Hong Kong, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor. We covered this yesterday.
The court said, sustained.
You told the FBI that you had knowledge that the assets flowing into Golden Spring, New York came from both the Middle East.
Mr. Horton said, same objection, Your Honor.
Ms. Schroff said, I hadn't finished question.
The court said, please continue.
And from Golden Spring, Hong Kong, correct?
Mr. Horton said, same objection, Your Honor. This was covered yesterday.
The court said, overruled.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. You told the FBI that you were aware that the assets in Golden Spring, New York came from both the Middle East and Hong Kong, correct?
I knew there were transfers from Golden Spring, Hong Kong to Golden Spring, New York, yes.
And you also knew that there were transfers from the Middle East to Golden Spring, New York, and you told the FBI that, correct? You remember that?
I knew that there were transfers to various companies.
Right. And by transfer, you mean money coming in, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you recall telling the FBI that you were perfectly aware that those transfers paid for Mr. Gov's personal and political expenses, correct?
I don't remember that.
Okay. Well, let me see if I can help you refresh your recollection.
The court said, "One moment, please. Go ahead."
Does that document refresh your recollection?
I've never seen this document before.
Let me try it this way.
The court said, "We're getting a little bit of feedback here and so."
Ms. Schrofa said, "I know."
The court said, "Go ahead."
Ma'am, you recall your meetings with.
The court said, "All right. We're still getting the feedback. All right. Let's try again."
Does this document refresh your recollection?
Are you referring to a specific paragraph?
Sure. The paragraph I hope that is now highlighted for you.
The court said, "So you're not to read anything out loud. The question is whether or not the document refreshes your recollection."
Yes.
Ms. Schrofa said, "Okay. You can take that down." And when you started at Golden Spring, Mr. Gwa asked you to research something called DDoS attacks. Do you remember that?
I do.
And what are DDoS attacks? Could you tell the jury, please?
Those were cyber attacks that, according to Boss, were done by the CCP to his platforms.
And there were also attacks to Golden Spring platforms, correct?
What do you mean by Golden Spring platforms?
I mean emails to Golden Spring.
What I was asked to investigate was specifically about Gwa Media, not Golden Spring.
Okay. So you were asked to look into or investigate the distributed denial of service attacks on Gwa Media platforms, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you did that along with the help of a gentleman named Raj Benraj, PH, correct? Or is it Ben Raja? I'm not sure.
Raj is his name.
Right. That's his first name, right? And Benraj is his last name? Do you recall that?
No, that is not his last name.
And there was also an ongoing concern about the email addresses used by Golden Spring, correct?
I don't know about that.
You don't recall William Gertz being on the board and asking for Proton Mail to be used?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection."
The court said, "Sustained."
Do you know who William Gertz is?
I do.
Who is that?
He is a journalist and he was a member of Rule of Law Society Board.
Right. And that's the board that you served on, correct? Rule of Law Society Board, right?
That's correct.
You had nothing to do with Rule of Law Foundation, correct?
I was not on that board, no.
Right. You had no job on that in that nonprofit, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So let's just go back to the email system used while communicating with you as a Golden Spring employee, okay?
Okay.
Okay. And do you recall Mr. Gertz, as a board member, talking to you about which email system to use?
I don't remember.
Do you remember getting an email from Mr. Gertz saying that he felt that Proton Mail was more secure because of the cyber attacks experienced by both Golden Spring and by Rule of Law Society?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor." Hearsay.
The court said, "Ms. Schroff, do not elicit hearsay testimony."
Ms. Schrofa said, "Your Honor, it's not going for the truth, it's simply going to show."
The court said, "If you're going to make an objection, or respond to an objection, you need to do it at the sidebar."
Ms. Schrofa said, "Okay. I apologize, Your Honor."
Continued on next page. At the sidebar.
The court said, "So what is the purpose of the question?"
Ms. Schrofa said, "Well, Your Honor, the government elicited that Proton Mail was used. I can't remember whose direct this was on. But Proton Mail was somehow used because people wanted to maintain secrets. I'm entitled to show that there were, 1. Concerns about the cybersecurity at both Golden Spring and the cybersecurity issues at Rule of Law Society. That she was aware of the cyber issues. One of the board members had specifically asked to use Proton Mail to have secure engagement. The document is not being offered for the truth. The documents are also email exchanges between her and the board, maintained in the regular course of business, which would also be an exception to the hearsay rule. So for those reasons, I asked her whether or not she had an awareness that one of her board members wanted to use Proton Mail. and I asked her if she could recall it, and if she can't recall it, I'm entitled to refresh her recollection. That's what I was trying to ask.
Mr. Horton said, so we did not elicit testimony about the purpose, if any, of using proton mail. It came in through
Louis Bonsukin, who was a salesperson or a customer representative at a car dealership in Texas, who testified the fact of a proton email address in a document that we discussed with him. The car dealership certainly doesn't know the purpose for which anybody outside of the dealership was using that proton email. So that testimony did not come in the way it was described. Ms. Schroff did elicit that, Ms. Maistrello had heard from Bill Gov't that he wanted to use proton mail. That's in. This further long statement about Bill Gov't talking at length about the reason he wanted to use it and Bill Govt's thoughts and Bill Govt's statements, that's hearsay, and that's why it's coming in. It's coming in to prove the truth of what Bill Gov't, who is not here, was saying.
Ms. Schroff said, it's coming in to show that the government, when it elicited the fact that purchase of the car was made through a proton mail address, therefore asking the jury to infer that use of a proton mail, and I didn't bring up proton mail questions. I'm almost 100% sure it came out on this direct somehow, that the jury should infer that that was a sign of a nefarious transaction. I am not seeking to introduce what Bill Gov't said because, frankly, the only thing the man did say is, let's use proton mail, which is the only fact I wanted to bring out and show that one of the board of directors, who is outside of any influence of Miles Gov't, used proton mail. That's the most basic fact I was seeking to elicit. And again, the email exchanges are all.
The court said, I want to go back to your question about whether she received an email from this individual in which he said X. My recollection is that I sustained the objection and so that it is not in.
Mr. Horton said, I think there was, I may be remembering this incorrectly. I thought there was a question unrelated to the email about whether she knew if somebody had used proton mail. Just the simple knowledge of whether she knew person X used proton mail. I thought that had come in. I think the point is not, just to be clear, that the proton mail is not relevant. It's that this is hearsay and it's about Bill Govt's purposes.
The court said yes. I'm excluding his statements. But also, I think that you're implying that the mere use of proton mail implies something.
Ms. Schroff said, no. They implied that to another witness. I was cleaning it up.
The court said no, they did not. They merely stated that the dealership received an email from proton mail, an individual using proton mail. They did not discuss any of the qualities of proton mail.
Ms. Schroff said, oh, they did not. They just wanted the jury to infer that something's wrong with using proton mail, which is why with that witness, I had to clarify that he gets a lot of emails from proton mail. But you know what? I'll move on, Your Honor.
The court said good.
Ms. Schroff said, I do want to note that these emails are maintained in the regular course of business, and they do fall under the business exception rule to the hearsay.
The court said, but you're not allowed to get in hearsay statements merely because they're inside of a business document.
Ms. Schroff said, that's true, Your Honor, but I thought it was relevant, and it's not hearsay. We've been arguing about hearsay throughout. And I just wanted to make sure the government is clear on defense's position that there are other exceptions to the hearsay rule. But I shall move on. It's not worth it.
Mr. Horton said, if I can briefly respond to the last thing Ms. Schroff said. If she intends to lay a foundation to get business records in, she can try to do that. I don't think that's been done yet. Ms. Maistrello is not a document custodian. There's some work to be done, I think, if that's coming next.
Ms. Schroff said, I don't think I need a document custodian to get a hearsay business record in. But thank you for the lecture.
The court said, Ms. Schroff?
Ms. Schroff said, yes, Your Honor. Your Honor.
The court said, the way that you were just speaking was huffy, and I ask you to please not do that.
Ms. Schroff said, I was huffy, Your Honor, but I'm tired, and I don't think this is a valid objection. The government knows it falls clearly within the business record rule. And the government is doing as much as it can to prolong this testimony. There's no reason for any of this. There really isn't. The government has done this with every objection here. They inject other issues that are really not relevant to the analysis. This is a simple issue.
The court said. So I don't agree with your claiming that this is an exception to the hearsay rule. So let us go back. And please, I want you to be even-tempered.
Ms. Schrofa said, "Thank you, Your Honor."
Continued on next page. In open court.
The court said. The objection was sustained.
By Ms. Schrofa.
You were aware of the need to investigate the distributed denial of services attack, correct?
Can you repeat the question, please?
You were asked to investigate the distributed denial of service attacks, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection. Asked and answered.
The court said. I'll allow the answer. Go ahead.
Yes.
The court said. And Ms. Schroff, you used a term there that I don't understand. Distributed what?
Ms. Schrofa said, distributed denial of service attacks.
The court said, okay. Go ahead.
And that's when a platform is cyber-attacked, correct?
In my understanding, yes.
And you worked on that issue with a gentleman named Raj Dangra, D. Chayanjire, correct?
Initially, I was alone. He was not hired yet.
Your testimony is that he was not hired when you were assigned this task?
That's correct.
Okay. And that came up when he was hired, correct, according to you?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. There came a time when he was in fact hired, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And he had a technology background that you did not have, correct?
That's correct.
And he was employed as a person in the IT department, correct?
Yes.
And he assisted with all IT-related issues, correct? That was his job, right?
Yes.
And he's the one who assisted you in investigating that matter, correct?
Yes.
And you emailed with him while he worked there, correct?
We mainly spoke. We shared the same office.
All right. Well, let me see if I can refresh your recollection about emailing with him, okay?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor. There was no failure of recollection.
The court said, sustained.
Do you recall emailing him about this specific task at hand?
I don't remember.
Ms. Schrofa said, may I approach, Your Honor?
The court said you may.
Is it fair to say, ma'am, that you interacted with him on issues involving the security of cyber systems?
We spoke about it.
Okay. And you also spoke to him about the issues of entrance and security for people entering the building, correct?
I sent an email to him as I did to other employees.
And you emailed about what topic, ma'am?
Are you referring to the email I have in my hand right now?
I don't need to. I just was testing your recollection of the topics you covered with him. You emailed him about security in the building, correct?
I don't remember.
Well, may I ask that you read that document and see if it refreshes your recollection?
I see the document, and I see that
The court said, well, don't say what the document says. The only question is, does it refresh your recollection? That's a yes or no question.
The witness said, oh.
It doesn't refresh my recollection, but I see what's written in the email.
Okay. And you were aware that there was a security issue at the building in which Golden Spring was located, correct?
We were told that we had to keep the building secure.
And you wanted to make sure only authorized people came to the Golden Spring, New York office, correct?
That's correct.
You put in place verification procedures, correct?
Yes.
You put in place the process whereby each vendor's name would have to be on a list before they could enter the building, correct?
That's correct.
You put in place a process so that the vendor's name would have to be told. The date of the visit would have to be told, the time of the visit would have to be told, and the reason for the visit would have to be told, correct?
Yes.
You put in place the requirement that each vendor have identification presented before they were allowed into the building to come to the Golden Spring, New York office, correct?
Yes.
And you were the person who made yourself responsible for making sure that the security team and any other party that was involved was aware of this procedure, correct?
Yes.
And you were the one who informed the entire team that you would keep a record of each of these procedures being followed, correct?
Mr. Horton said, Your Honor, the document is not in evidence.
Ms. Schrofa said, I'm not asking about the document, Your Honor, most respectfully.
The court said, so first, the witness must answer, I don't recall, before considering a document that may or may not refresh her recollection. So the procedure is, you're asked a question. If you say that you don't recall, then she says, is there something that might refresh your recollection? It is at that time that you might refer to the document. Go ahead.
By Ms. Schrofa.
Would you like me to repeat the question, ma'am?
Yes, please.
Sure. And do you remember that in the year 2018, while you were working at Golden Spring, you took on the responsibility of forwarding this protocol to the security team to make sure that everyone was aware of the protocol itself?
I don't remember doing that.
May I ask if the document that I have handed to you, and if you look, refreshes your recollection?
Yes.
Do you now remember that you said you would remain responsible for forwarding that message of the protocol to the security team? Correct?
As I read it on the document, yes.
Okay. And you?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, so you can't say what the document says. You can only say if the document refreshes your recollection. Does it help you to remember what she is asking about? That's the question. Does the document refresh your recollection?
The witness said, it does not. By Ms. Schrofa.
It does not refresh your recollection of what you did in 2018, correct?
It does not.
In fact, there are a lot of things you've forgotten about 2018 now, correct?
Yes.
You've forgotten your interactions with the security team, correct?
I forgot certain things, yes.
And you also forgot your involvement with the security team vis-a-vis the cyber attack issues, correct? I'll rephrase that. You've forgotten how you interacted with the security teams regarding the entering and leaving of visitors to the Golden Springs office, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, so that is a compound question.
Ms. Schrofa said, you know what, Your Honor, I'll move on. Thank you. Now on direct, you testified, did you not, about something called rule of law, right? Those were the questions asked of you yesterday. Do you remember that?
I do.
Okay. There's no such thing as rule of law, correct?
I don't understand the question.
Sure. I'll be happy to try again. There is rule of law society, correct?
There is.
Right. And there is rule of law foundation, correct?
There is, correct.
There was no entity simply called rule of law, correct?
No. We referred to both entities as rule of law collectively.
You referred to that?
Mr. Horton said, objection.
The court said, overruled.
We did.
The court said, was that a question?
Ms. Schrofa said, I'm sorry.
The court said, you've asked a question. You referred to them, is that the question?
Ms. Schrofa said, yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
The court said, you may answer.
We did.
Well, let's try that. There was a board for the Rule of Law Society, correct?
Yes.
You were on that board, right?
I was.
There was a Rule of Law Foundation board, correct?
Yes.
You were not on that board, correct?
I was not.
Right. So if somebody asked you if you were on the board of Rule of Law, you would have to say, I'm on the board of Rule of Law Society. I am not on the board of Rule of Law Foundation, correct?
Yes.
Because that would be a truthful answer, right?
Yes.
And it would be complete, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now the board of Rule of Law Society in 2018 consisted of Steve Bannon, correct?
Yes.
Sasha Gong, correct?
Yes.
Bill Gertz, correct?
Yes.
And Jennifer Mercurio, correct?
That's correct.
And you, right?
Right.
Okay. And it was not Miles Gua who gave you any position on that board. It was the board that voted to get you that position, correct?
He chose me.
Let's try that. Who told you he chose you?
He did.
He told you that he chose you to be on the board. That's your testimony?
It is.
Okay. Did he make an announcement? Welcome to the Board of Directors Rule of Law Society. I have appointed you to be on the board?
I don't remember a public announcement.
Okay. Did he send an email?
No.
Did he put it on Twitter?
He did not.
Did he put it on YouTube?
I don't know.
He's a man, according to you, who likes publicity, right?
What do you mean about with publicity?
Okay. According to you, he's the type of man who likes to be the center of attention, right?
He is.
He is. So no grand announcement about him making you a member of the board? No, right?
I don't remember.
Okay. Each one of you 5 people had 1 vote, correct?
In general, you mean?
No. I mean as when you were on the board of the Rule of Law Society.
Oh, yes.
Okay. I don't mean that's what I meant. For the Rule of Law Society, you had 1 vote, right?
Yes.
And there were 5 of you, right?
Correct.
Okay. What did it take to be a majority?
I don't remember.
You don't remember what it took to be a majority for a board that you sat on for less than 2 years?
That's correct.
Okay. You voted against certain requests, correct?
Yes.
You voted no, correct?
Once, yes.
You were never fired from the board, right?
I was not.
You were not. You remained on the board until you decided to quit for medical reasons, correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Gwynn never called you into his office and said, "Hey, why did you vote that way, correct?"
Not that I remember.
Okay. I just want to make sure. You'd remember something like that, right?
I don't know if I would remember.
You wouldn't remember being fired from a board?
I would remember being fired from a board. That, yes.
You'd remember him chastising you, correct? Because, according to you, he was boss, right?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. You would remember being chastised by him because, according to you, he was boss, right?
I would remember.
And he never chastised you for the way you voted, right?
No.
Okay. You testified about a home that he bought in Connecticut, is that right?
Yes.
And that home was bought in February or March of 2020, is that correct?
I don't remember the exact date.
It was bought after you started working there, correct?
Yes.
And before you quit, right?
That's correct.
When did you quit?
In April of 2020.
April of what?
2020.
And we know from yesterday that your first day on the job was February 19th, correct?
My first day on the job was February 19th of 2018.
What? 2019, right? 2018.
2018.
Right. So that house had to be bought somewhere between 2018 and 2020, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And did you visit the house?
Once.
You visited the house once?
Yes.
It's huge, right?
It's not small.
And there were people in and out of that house doing broadcasting, correct?
When I was there, I didn't see anyone.
When you were there, did you see the office that he had in the house?
I don't remember.
Do you remember seeing equipment in the house?
No.
Do you remember seeing cameras in the house?
No.
Do you remember seeing camera lighting in the house?
No.
Do you remember seeing background screens in the house?
No.
Sitting here today, do you know who paid for all of that equipment that was in his house?
Mr. Horton said, objection.
Did you know? Ms. Schrofa said, "I apologize, Your Honor. I'll withdraw." Did you know if there was, even if you didn't see it? You knew there was equipment in his house in Connecticut, correct?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. You testified right now on cross-examination that you never saw this equipment at his Connecticut home, correct?
Correct.
Did you know that he had equipment in his Connecticut home?
I don't know.
Okay. Did you know if he had broadcast equipment at the Sherry Netherland?
Yes.
He did have it, correct?
He did.
And he had the same equipment that I recited 2 minutes ago, correct?
Such as?
I can repeat it if you need me to.
Yes, please.
Okay. He had cameras, correct?
Yes.
Background screens, correct?
That I don't remember.
Lighting, correct?
Yes.
Recording equipment, correct?
Yes.
Broadcasting equipment, correct, most particularly this one?
Yes.
All of that was paid for by Golden Spring, New York, correct?
No.
It wasn't paid for by Golden Spring, New York?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, asked and answered.
Who paid for it, according to you?
Soraka.
And who's Soraka?
Soraka was a company that paid for media and tech expenses.
And Soraka was the holding company for Golden Springs, New York, right?
Can you repeat the question?
Soraka was the holding company for Golden Spring, New York, correct?
I don't know about that.
You don't know William J.E. managed Soraka?
I don't.
You don't know if Soraka had family fund money?
I don't.
So you don't know anything about Soraka, but you're sure Soraka paid the bill.
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, compound question.
Do you know anything about Soraka?
What I just told you.
Okay. Where did the money into Soraka come from?
I don't know.
Okay. You testified about an office at 800 Fifth Avenue, correct?
Yes.
And is it fair to say that that was really an apartment building? Like a makeshift office that was put in place?
Yes.
Okay. It was a 3-bedroom apartment, right?
It was a 2-bedroom apartment.
Okay. And people were using it as an office, right?
We were, yes.
Right. And there came a time when it was just too crammed and everybody agreed to move, correct?
We moved in 2019.
Okay. And you moved to the East 64th building, correct?
Yes.
And Golden Spring relocated there, correct?
Correct.
And the holding company named Soraka also relocated there, correct?
I don't know what the official location of Soraka was.
Okay. So you don't know if Soraka relocated to 64th Street. Do I have it right?
The court said, asked and answered.
And you continued to work for Golden Spring at East 64th Street, correct?
Yes.
And you testified on direct you worked long hours, correct?
Yes.
Was it Golden Spring's practice to have free lunch for every one of its employees every day of the week?
At 800 Fifth, yes.
Okay. That practice continued at 64th, correct?
No.
Okay. When you worked long hours, you were given a hotel room to sleep in the city, correct?
When I was working consecutive days, yes.
Okay. They put you up in a hotel, didn't make you drive back and forth from work, right?
I could choose.
You could choose, right? And you chose, right?
I did.
Okay. Now you testified on direct about how bills were paid, right? I'll move on.
How vendors were paid.
I'm sorry?
How vendors were paid.
Okay. Fair enough. And do I have it right? The vendor would need paying and you would go to Yvette. Correct?
It depended on the amount.
So if it was above a certain amount, you would go to Yvette. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. And you referred to Yvette as Yamping Wang. Is that right?
When I talked about her to my colleagues, then I would call her Yvette. When I talked to her, I would use her Chinese name.
Okay. And it was Yvette who decided whether to pay the vendor or not, correct?
Yes.
There were times when you had to get pre-authorization from Yvette before you would undertake an expense from a particular vendor. Correct?
Yes.
Ms. Strofa said, okay. Could I just have the witness and the jury see SM62, please? You recall testifying about this document on direct?
I remember.
Okay. And this document is you seeking someone to sign off on payment to a particular vendor. Is that correct?
It's a payment request form.
Right. So if I could just highlight for you the name of the payee, that would be Apple Incorporated, correct?
Yes.
And Apple is at 767 Fifth Avenue, which is right next to the Sherry Netherland, right? The FAO Schwartz building, correct?
Yes.
Okay. If you could scroll down to the payment amount, it's $1,217.17. Well, up top it says 17 cents. But here it says 95 cents, correct?
1,117.95.
Small amount, right, relatively?
What do you mean by small?
It's a small amount of money. It's $1,117 for 3 pieces of equipment from Apple, correct?
That's the correct amount, yes.
Okay. You did not have authority to sanction payment on $1,117, right?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. You did not have the authority to allow payment on $1,117.95, correct?
Not with Soraka.
You had no authority to sanction payment, correct?
Not with Soraka.
Your testimony today is, if this bill were going to Golden Spring, you could have paid the bill?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor." Asked and answered.
The court said, sustained.
Let's see the top of this document, okay? You see that's where it says Golden Spring, New York Limited?
I do.
Okay. And let's go to the bottom of that document. Requested by you, correct?
Yes.
When you filled out the form, go back up, please. You filled out the requisition to Golden Spring, correct?
No. It was crossed out.
Continued on next page. By Ms. Schrofa.
That crossout is by Max Krasner, is it not?
It is.
Right. That is not your handwriting, right?
It's not.
Right. So when you sought requisition payment on this particular bill, you filled it out as the payer being Golden Spring, correct?
The original form was a Golden Spring form.
Right. So you filled out the form asking Golden Spring to pay that bill because you're not the one who crossed that top part out. Right?
I don't remember how it went.
Okay. Ms. Schrofa said, could I scroll down again, please? Requested by Karin Maistrello. Am I pronouncing your name right, ma'am?
You are.
Okay. So you requested it, correct?
I did.
Okay. And it was approved by Max Krasner, correct?
Yes.
Okay. When you filled out the form, you did not request it yourself and approve it yourself with Golden Spring on top, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, sustained.
Ms. Schrofa said, okay. When you submitted the form, there was no Sirocco written on top, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection. It's been asked and answered.
The court said, sustained. Asked and answered.
Sitting here today, do you remember who these devices were for?
I do not.
Okay. And you testified about this gentleman named Max Krasner, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And Max Krasner also handled payments and bank accounts for Rule of Law Society, correct?
Yes.
And you didn't handle any money as president or a board member for Rule of Law Society, correct?
I didn't handle, no.
Right. You were never allowed to handle any finances at Rule of Law Society, right?
I would always sit with Max.
I'm sorry, what did you? Ms. Schrofa said. I could not hear her answer. I apologize, Your Honor.
I would always sit with Max to check the accounts.
That's not my question. My question was you were never in charge of the finances of the Rule of Law Society, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection.
The court said, asked and answered.
You can authorize payment on behalf of Rule of Law Society, right?
I don't know.
Okay. You are a board member and president and you don't know?
Mr. Horton said, objection.
The court said, sustained.
You testified about somebody named Defu Chow, correct?
Yes.
You testified that he was May's, his daughter's boyfriend, correct?
Yes.
Do you know, by the way, what work he did while he was working in China?
I don't remember.
Do you remember at all if he was trained in security while he worked in China?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
I don't remember.
Do you remember if he was employed in China in the security industry?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered again. She said she didn't remember.
The court said, sustained.
Do you know how he got from China to the United States?
By plane.
Under what circumstances, do you remember?
Mr. Horton said, objection.
The court said you may answer.
I don't know.
You testified about a man named William J., correct?
Correct.
And it was Mr. J. Am I saying his name correctly? J, right?
Yes.
Okay. He's the one who asked you to take on a position at ACA Capital, correct?
Yes.
And on direct you testified that it was Mr. Gwa who introduced you to Mr. J., correct?
Yes.
Isn't it true that Mr. Gwa had nothing to do with that introduction? In fact, it was Yvette Wang who introduced you to Mr. J.?
No, I'm pretty sure boss introduced me to William.
Okay. Do you remember testifying in a deposition in a case?
Yes.
Do you remember testifying under oath?
Yes.
Do you remember having a lawyer there?
Yes.
And remember giving this testimony while you were under oath. Saying you were introduced to William by Mrs. Wang as a person of trust and I met him several times. Do you recall that testimony you gave?
I don't.
Okay. Well, let's see if we can show you 3525-001 at page 14. Ms. Schrofa said, could you just go one page back? Do you see the bottom of that page?
I do.
Does that refresh the testimony you gave under oath at a deposition?
Yes.
And under oath at a deposition, you said, I was introduced to William by Mrs. Wang as a person of trust. And I met him several times. Correct?
Mr. Horton said, Objection, Your Honor. This is not evidence. Not before the jury.
The court said, Overruled.
Mr. Horton said, It is before the jury, and it's not in evidence.
The court said, Oh, you're saying that this is being shown to the jurors? This should not be shown to the jurors. It is not. Do you have a document in front of you?
The jury said it was.
The court said, All right. So that was an error.
By Ms. Schrofa.
Does that refresh your recollection?
Yes.
So you did say that under oath, right?
I did.
And that was years earlier than your testimony today, correct?
Yes.
And you already testified you have trouble remembering some things, correct?
Yes.
And your memory then was better than your memory now, correct?
I don't know about that.
You don't know about that.
I don't know when my memory was better.
Okay. So back then you said it was Yvette who introduced you to William. That we are clear on, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Schrofa said, You can take that down. Thank you. I'm sorry about that. You also testified about Mr. J being at the East 64th Street office, correct?
Sometimes he came, yes.
And when he came, he worked off of his laptop and you were there, right?
Most times.
Did you guys share an office?
We shared a floor.
My question was, did you share an office?
Yes.
Right. So you and he sat in the same office, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Gwynn never sat in that office with you, right? It was you and William J., correct?
And other people, yes.
Right. But you shared. Mr. Gwynn wasn't in that space at all, correct?
He was not.
Okay. And it was William J. who asked you to join the board of ACA, right?
Yes.
And he told you why he wanted you to join the board. Isn't that right?
Yes.
He told you he was looking for people to invest, correct?
Yes, he was looking for investments in New York and the States.
He was looking for investors as well, right?
I don't recall that.
Okay. So he wanted you to help him find people who would invest, correct?
I believe so.
And people who invest are called investors, correct?
They are.
Okay. And you sat on that board of ACA until you received a subpoena, correct?
Yes.
Okay. When you got the subpoena, who did you go talk to first about the subpoena? Do you remember?
Yes.
Who was that?
Daniel Podhasky.
Right. You didn't go to Yvette, right?
The first person I talked to was Daniel.
You didn't go to Mr. Gua, right?
I did not.
Okay. And no one else was present when you discussed that subpoena with Mr. Podhasky, correct?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. No one else was present when you discussed the subpoena with Mr. Daniel Podhasky, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And Ms. Wang was not present for that conversation, correct?
She was not.
Okay. And you were free to tell him whatever was on your mind about that subpoena, right?
Yes.
Okay. You could have asked Mr. Podhasky to get you a lawyer from that had never been at the Golden Springs office, correct?
I could have.
Okay. So you then testified yesterday about being at a deposition. You recall that testimony?
Yes.
Okay. And you were at a deposition, correct?
I was.
Okay. And you were deposed, right?
I was.
You gave testimony, correct?
I did.
You were put under oath, correct?
I was.
You were sworn to tell the truth, correct?
Mr. Horton said, Objection, Your Honor. We've been through this.
The court said, Asked and answered.
And you had a lawyer there, right?
Mr. Horton said, Objection. Same objection.
The court said, Sustained.
Ms. Wang was not seated next to you during the deposition, right?
Mr. Horton said, Objection. Same objection. We've been through this.
The court said, Sustained.
Ms. Schrofa said, Your Honor, may I approach?
The court said yes.
Continued on next page. At sidebar.
The court said, So my recollection is that you asked yesterday whether Ms. Wang was there at the deposition.
Ms. Schrofa said, Right. But I don't think I ever covered that there was a lawyer and Ms. Wang was 3 seats away. I never covered the scope of what she testified to during the deposition. I never questioned her on all the acts that happened after the deposition was over. I never covered any part of the discussion about the deposition with Miles Gov't about all of this. I don't think I covered any of that. And I'm pretty certain I checked last night, but if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I don't think I covered that. I think I'm entitled to show that Ms. Wang was not seated next to her as they implied. That there was a lawyer seated next to her. Ms. Wang was 3 seats down. I think I'm allowed to show all of that.
Mr. Horton said, Your Honor, this line of questioning, which is not just the last several questions, but I think it's about 10 minutes of questions, is needlessly cumulative. It's going to significantly prolong the trial, particularly if it's a pace that's continued with the witnesses who are to come. And we've gone over it again and again and again, and Your Honor has sustained a number of the same kind of objection, which is that the question is asked and answered, and it's followed again by the same questions and the same topic.
The court said, so the questioning has been repetitive. You found every way to ask whether an individual gave sworn testimony at a deposition, and so it is needless. So if you would just stick to what is necessary to be more efficient in the questioning.
Ms. Shrofa said, I'd be happy to try, Your Honor.
The court said, okay.
Mr. Horton said, can we ask how much is left of her cross-examination?
Ms. Shrofa said, I have no idea. I don't know. I think 30 minutes.
The court said, then take a moment to think about it.
Ms. Shrofa said, 30 minutes.
The court said, 30 minutes.
Ms. Shrofa said, but I'm telling you honestly, I have a lot of trouble hearing her. It's also adding to my degree of frustration, but I simply cannot hear her. And I feel ridiculous asking. I can't hear you like 10 times. I apologize, Your Honor, but I'm having a lot of trouble hearing her.
The court said, do you need a hearing aid?
Ms. Shrofa said, I can't have a hearing aid. My deafness was due to some kind of weird injury. I was seen at MT Sinai Hospital in Brooklyn. They gave me prednisone injections to try and recover it. I can't do anything about it. I normally don't have this struggle. So I apologize, Your Honor, I really do, but I don't.
The court said, do you need a device to amplify what you're hearing in the ear that works?
Ms. Shrofa said, I'm only having trouble with this witness. I haven't had trouble with the other 2 before. I will try better, Your Honor. But I really am having trouble hearing her. And I don't want to keep asking you to repeat. So you see when I'm craning forward. I'm really trying to see if I can hear better. So I apologize about that. I am having trouble hearing.
The court said, are you making a request that I?
Ms. Shrofa said, no, I'm not.
The court said, install any additional equipment or give you an opportunity to have a medical exam or somehow address the deafness.
Ms. Shrofa said, no, Your Honor, not at all. I'm not seeking to make a record of any kind. I do not plan to raise this at any appeal. I'm just telling you why I'm having trouble hearing her, that's all. It is nothing that I intend. I'm not laying the foundation for anything down the road at all. I'm just trying to explain what's going on, that's all.
The court said, I am going to ask her again to speak up.
Ms. Shrofa said, okay. I just want to be very clear, Your Honor. I'm really not trying to lay a foundation about anything. I hope that's very clear.
Mr. Horton said, Your Honor, we just want to note that cross has been longer than the direct. And Your Honor is interested in the July 4th target that was set up in the case. And we have concerns about being able to hit that at the pace this is going.
Ms. Shrofa said, Your Honor, we join in that concern. And we also ask the government that if they could stop looping. That would also make the trial shorter.
The court said, actually looping is a more efficient way actually.
Ms. Shrofa said, I don't think so. I think it's leading and I think it's very prejudicial to the defense. And, defense lawyers have long argued against looping, Your Honor.
The court said, so there is a long way and a short way to do a direct examination. If we take the long way, prolongs the trial.
Ms. Shrofa said, I apologize, Your Honor. I always thought just saying what happened next is shorter than, When you went to the house and then saw the blue flag, then tell me what happened next. So I apologize. I will do better. I will try to move it right along.
In open court. By Ms. Schrofa.
At the deposition, your lawyer was seated next to you, correct?
Yes.
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, you may answer. Go ahead.
Ms. Wang was seated 3 seats down, correct?
2.
And she did not speak during the deposition, correct?
She did not.
And you testified at the deposition that you were an Italian citizen, correct?
Yes.
You testified that you were on a visa in the United States, correct?
Yes.
And is it fair to say in 2023, you were still on a visa, correct?
Yes.
By that time you had stopped working for Golden Spring, correct?
Yes.
And by that time you had stopped working with Rule of Law Society, correct?
Yes.
In 2023, you reached out to a lawyer who still worked there named Victor Serta, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
The court said, you may answer.
Yes.
You asked him to help you with your immigration status, correct?
I asked for advice, yes.
He declined, correct?
That's correct.
You testified on direct that after the deposition, you went to lunch, is that correct?
That's correct.
You went to lunch with Yvette, correct?
Yes.
And then you returned to the office, you testified, right?
We did.
And you testified on direct that you, Yvette, went to Ms. Sturga's office, correct?
Yes.
And your testimony was that Yvette told Ms. Sturga that you had done an excellent job, correct?
Yes.
Is it fair to say, Ms. Maistrello, that at the deposition, you testified that you did not even know why you were there? You recall giving that testimony at the deposition?
Yes.
And according to you, Ms. Wang praised you for testifying that you had no idea why you were at a deposition, correct? That's your testimony?
She just said that I did well during the deposition.
Okay. And according to you, she praised that you did well at the deposition. And then she proceeded to call you a flute, correct?
Yes.
And isn't it fair to say she has never ever referred to you as flute, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, you may answer.
She did before.
She did before the deposition, called you flute?
She did.
Okay. So long before the deposition she called you a flute and, according to you, after the deposition she also called you a flute?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor. It's compound.
The court said, you may answer.
I don't remember when she did.
You don't remember if it was before the deposition?
Mr. Horton said, objection. Asked and answered.
The court said, sustained.
You do recall though testifying that you had no idea why you were being deposed, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection.
The court said, asked and answered.
And you testified to that as a person who was sitting on a particular board, correct?
Mr. Horton said, same objection.
Ms. Schrofa said, I'll move on, Your Honor. You testified on direct, did you not, about a press conference on the launch of the Rule of Law Society, correct?
Rule of Law Society and Foundation.
Well, let's just talk about Rule of Law Society, okay? Okay. You coordinated the travel for people for that event, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection.
The court said, the battery is gone. Do we have another microphone? And would you speak up, please?
Mr. Horton said, objection. Your Honor, we object to the premise of the question limiting it to the Rule of Law Society.
The court said, well, the questioner has asked the witness to limit her answers to the Rule of Law Society, and that your concerns may be addressed on redirect. Go ahead.
You coordinated travel, correct?
Yes.
You were the one who actually made the bookings, right?
I was not the only person, but yes.
But your job was to make bookings, right? Travel bookings.
That was not my job, but I did in that instance.
And you coordinate people's flights, correct?
I don't remember that.
And do you remember booking hotel rooms for people?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor. Cumulative.
Ms. Schrofa said, I'll move on, Your Honor. Do you recall that part and parcel of your job throughout the time you were there was to do these kinds of bookings? Right?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor. We covered this."
The court said, sustained.
Was part and parcel of your job to actually visit the hotel rooms prior to the guest starting their stay to inspect the rooms themselves?
Are you referring to a rule of law society job?
Yes.
Then the answer is no.
How about for Golden Spring?
Yes, but only for boss, not for guests.
Okay. So your testimony is you looked at the hotel rooms ahead of time, correct, when it was for Mr. Gov't. Correct?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection. Asked and answered, Your Honor."
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
Yes.
And when you went to inspect the rooms, you took a cybersecurity team person with you, correct? And a security person with you, correct?
Yes.
Is it fair to say, ma'am, that you have never talked to Mr. Gov't about any finances surrounding the Rule of Law Society?
I don't remember.
Mr. Gov't never, ever told you he was going to donate $1 million as a sponsor of Rule of Law Society, correct?
He did during meetings.
Your testimony is he told you that he was going to donate $1 million?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection. Asked and answered."
The court said, were you at the meetings? You need to speak up.
The witness said, yes.
The court said, go ahead.
By Ms. Schrofa.
Could you tell us who else, according to you, was at this meeting?
People varied, but I remember Steve Bannon being there. Sometimes William was there. Yvette was there.
So according to you, Mr. Bannon was there. I missed the second name.
William.
William J., right?
Correct.
And Yvette was there. That's your testimony?
Yes.
So there was no member of the public there, correct?
No.
This meeting, according to you, was not broadcast to anyone, correct?
No.
You never heard him say that on Twitter, YouTube, or any social media, correct?
I don't remember that.
You don't remember ever hearing him say that out loud in public ever, correct?
I don't remember.
Now, you testified about an entity that the government in its direct referred to as rule of law, correct? All the questions yesterday. Do you remember they called it rule of law, right? Do you remember that?
I remember discussing the rule of law organizations.
Okay. So I just want to be very clear for cross-examination that I'm only asking you about the entity you were involved with, which is Rule of Law Society, okay?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor." Mischaracterizes her testimony.
The court said, sustained. She has stated that she held offices within the Rule of Law Society.
Ms. Schrofa said, right.
The court said, involved in is a mischaracterization of her testimony.
You're not involved with any operations of Rule of Law Foundation, correct?
I was not.
You were not on the board of Rule of Law Foundation, correct?
I was not.
You were not involved with anything having to do with Rule of Law Foundation by the board, correct?
I was not.
Okay. Rule of Law Society had a following, correct?
I think it's fair to say that Boss had a following.
Okay. So Boss had a following from which Rule of Law Society benefited. Is that also a fair thing to say?
It is.
On direct testimony, you talked about the 1-year broadcast anniversary, correct? You remember. That was an awkward question. I apologize. You remember the broadcast that was done on the 1-year anniversary?
I do.
Okay. And that was in November of 2019, correct?
Yes.
And the broadcast was from the East 64th Street office, right?
It was.
That was done on Gwm Media, correct?
I think it was.
I didn't hear you, I'm sorry.
I think it was.
Okay. And you testified that you did nothing for that fundraiser, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Your testimony is you did not set up travel for people who were flying into New York for this occasion?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection. Cumulative, Your Honor."
The court said, asked and answered.
And according to you, at this fundraiser, Yvette asked you to move money from Soraka and Golden Spring to show donations to Rule of Law Society, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you testified to that. That you were told that you should do this so that people could see big amounts of money shown on screen, correct?
Yes.
And you were told this by Gov't, correct, according to you?
Yes.
And you were told by Gov't that she wanted you to do this so that she could show large donations to Rule of Law Society, correct?
Correct.
And you said on direct that you did not want to do that because the transfers were not real, correct?
Yes.
And you testified that you considered them to be internal transfers, correct?
Yes.
And according to you, Golden Spring giving money to Rule of Law Society, you would consider that to be an internal transfer, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So if Golden Spring wanted to donate to Rule of Law Society, you would object to that as an internal transfer?
No. We were asked to transfer money and then send it back.
But you never sent it back, right?
I never transferred it in the first place.
Right. And when others transferred it, sitting here today, you have no evidence that they ever transferred it back, correct?
I don't remember.
You never checked any books from Golden Springs about this money transfer, correct?
I never checked Golden Springs books.
Right. And you have no idea if that money was ever transferred back to Golden Springs, correct?
I don't remember.
You don't remember or you don't know?
I don't remember.
Do you know how much money Golden Springs donated to Rule of Law Society?
I don't know.
Do you know how much money Golden Spring donated to Rule of Law Foundation?
I don't know.
You never checked the books for the Rule of Law Society, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection. Cumulative.
The court said, asked and answered.
You also testified on direct that you told Gov't you did not want to do this, right?
Yes.
Gov't didn't force you, right?
No.
And then it was your testimony yesterday that after you told her that, Gov't could sense that you were upset, correct?
Yes.
And according to you, Gov't saw that you were upset and then still told you that, don't worry about it. Someone else will do it. Is that what she told you, according to you?
Yes.
Did anyone else come up to you and complain that they were forced to do something like this?
Yes.
Really? Who?
3 colleagues.
3 colleagues came up to you and said they complained to you. Is that your testimony?
It is.
You didn't testify to that on direct yesterday, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection.
The court said, overruled. You may answer whether you testified.
I don't remember.
And when these 3 colleagues came up to you and complained about this, you could have gone to William J., correct?
Why would I have gone to William?
Well, isn't he one of the people that you had a good relationship with?
He was not even at the office.
Okay. He has emailed out, right?
He has an email, yes.
Okay. You were on the board at that time, correct?
Yes.
You could have brought it up at a board meeting, correct?
I could have.
You could have emailed any number of people about this, correct?
I could.
You could have emailed Dan Podhasky, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection. It's cumulative, Your Honor.
The court said, sustained.
Did you email anyone about these 3 colleagues asking, complaining to you?
Mr. Horton said, same objection, Your Honor.
The court said, sustained.
After that event, you didn't resign from the board because you were asked to do something wrong according to you, correct?
I did not.
And the 3 colleagues didn't resign either, correct?
Not all of them were part of the board.
They didn't resign from their job, right?
They did not.
Okay. Is it fair to say, ma'am, that you had no authority to transfer any money out of Soraka? Is that correct?
That's correct.
You had no authority to pay any bills with the Soraka account, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor. We covered this.
The court said, sustained. You've gone over this.
The first meeting of the board for Rule of Law Society was in May of 2019. Do you remember that?
I don't.
You don't remember the very first meeting in May of 2019?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, sustained.
The next meeting was on June 27, 2019. Do you recall that meeting?
I don't.
Do you recall a special meeting held to discuss issues raised by the firing of Sasha Gong?
I don't.
Do you remember Sasha Gong approaching the Rule of Law Society's board because she'd been fired for doing the Voice of America interview with Mr. Gov't?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Do you remember a special meeting being convened to discuss Ms. Gong getting fired by Voice of America for doing an interview with Mr. Guo? Do you recall that?
I don't remember a special meeting. I remember her sharing this fact.
And you don't remember the board voting on her request to get assistance to sue Voice of America for wrongful firing?
I don't remember.
Okay. Do you remember August 23rd, 2019, announcement about a September 3rd, 2019, board meeting? Do you recall that?
I do not.
Do you recall that there was an actual board meeting on September 3rd of 2019?
I don't.
Do you remember that one of the agendas was to review the budget? Does that help you refresh your recollection?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, I think that you've already gone over this territory, Ms. Schroff.
Do you recall the Rule of Law Society having a proposal, and you testified to this yesterday, to ship PPE to China? Correct?
Yes.
And you testified that made no sense to you, right?
That's correct.
And you testified that it didn't make any sense to you that PPE was being sent back to China because China was the one who was making the N95 masks. Correct?
That's correct.
But the N95 masks are just one part of PPE, correct?
I don't understand the question.
There are different kinds of masks, right, during COVID?
In general?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And when you thought that, you had no knowledge whether the ordinary person in China had access to an N95 mask, correct?
I don't remember.
And you had no knowledge if the family members of people who were in the United States wanted masks sent to their family members in China, correct?
What people?
Dissidents, people who were supporters of Rule of Law Society.
The court said, she can't testify as to what was on the mind of other people.
You were aware, were you not, that Rule of Law Society was supporting dissidents, correct?
That was the mission.
And dissidents had family in China, correct?
Some may have.
And dissidents in the United States would want their family members in China to have.
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor."
N95 protection, correct?
The court said, sustained.
You testified on direct, did you not? That it was your understanding that N95 masks were sent to Mr. Guo's home?
Yes.
Which home?
The one in Connecticut.
And sitting here today, do you know if Mr. Guo was in his Connecticut home at any part of the pandemic?
In March of 2020, yes.
Okay. And in March of 2020, your testimony is that Mr. Guo was not on a yacht, but at his home in Connecticut?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Your testimony is that it is your recollection that in March of 2020, Mr. Guo, during the pandemic, was at his home in Connecticut and not on a yacht?
At least for some part of March of 2020, yes.
What part?
I don't remember the exact dates.
You don't know any dates at all, correct?
I don't remember the dates.
Right. Did you have any personal knowledge about who was staying at the Connecticut home during the pandemic?
I can only speak to the first month of the pandemic.
Okay. Do you actually know who was living in that house?
I know he was there and his wife was there.
You don't know who else was there, correct?
If there were other people, I don't.
They will consult with you as to who is living in their home, right?
No, they would not.
It didn't involve your job, right?
No.
During the pandemic, you did not go to the office, correct?
We stopped going to the office on March 16th.
I'm only asking about you, ma'am. My question to you is, were you going to the office?
I stopped going to the office on March 16th.
Okay. And, in fact, Yvette went to the office during the pandemic every single day, correct?
I don't know. I wasn't there.
Okay. So when you said, we stopped going, you really meant you stopped going, correct?
I meant me and my colleagues.
Well, you don't know if your colleagues stopped going, right? You don't know if Dan Podhasky stopped going, correct?
I know.
Your testimony is Dan Podhasky stopped going to the office during the COVID pandemic?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection. Cumulative."
The court said, sustained.
Ms. Schrofa said, I'll move on, Your Honor. You recall discussing with the FBI, did you not, that, about the shipments of rice and PPE? Do you recall testimony about that? I mean, talking to them about that topic?
I do.
And you recall that you told them that you were no longer at the office, were working from home, and you had no idea what was being moved, correct?
Can you repeat the question, please?
You told the FBI that you were not at the office, you did not know what was being moved. But that is what you had heard, correct?
What do you mean about something that was being moved?
You didn't see any PP being moved from the office to Connecticut, correct? You weren't there, right?
I wasn't there physically, no.
Right. You had no personal knowledge. You were simply repeating what somebody else had told you, correct?
That's not correct.
Okay. Well, did you tell the FBI that you were not at the office and you did not see these moves?
I did not see the moves with my eyes as I was not there.
Okay. So you have no personal knowledge. You only know what somebody told you.
I was asked to arrange some of the moves.
You were asked to arrange the moves of PP?
Yes.
Okay. And how many moves did you arrange?
I don't remember.
From where to where?
From the office to the home in Connecticut.
What amount?
I don't remember.
Okay. Sitting here today, do you recall being told to send PP to the homes of employees of Golden Spring?
I don't remember.
Do you remember being asked to send PP to the homes of Rule of Law Society people?
No, I don't remember.
Do you remember being asked to ship PP to anyone else?
To NYPD.
You sent them to NYPD, correct?
I remember boxes being sent to NYPD.
I didn't hear that. Bosses what?
I remember boxes of PPE.
Boxes?
Of masks being sent to NYPD precincts.
Okay. And you remember boxes being sent to hospitals?
I don't.
Okay. And when you testified on direct about these boxes being sent to the NYPD, you testified that Yvette wanted you to put Mr. Gua's name on them and you declined, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. The important thing was for the PP to get to the NYPD, correct?
The important thing for who?
For anybody who needed PP.
I don't understand the question.
Okay. I will move on. Nobody drafted a letter for you to sign from Mr. Gua to the NYPD, correct?
No.
Nobody forced you to draft such a letter, correct?
I was asked to draft it.
My question was nobody forced you to draft such a letter, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you, in fact, never drafted such a letter, correct?
I did not.
Okay. Mr. Gua didn't say, if my name is not on the letter, don't send the PPE to the NYPD, right?
He never said that.
Right. And NYPD got the PPE, right?
I believe they did.
Right. You sent it, right?
I did not.
Exactly. Somebody else sent it because you weren't physically there, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, you testified a great deal about the security and how you thought it was nonsensical, correct?
I testified that it was not needed.
Okay. And when you decided it was not needed, were you aware that Mr. Guo was visited by ministers from China and agents of the CCP? Were you aware of that?
I was aware of a visit in 2017.
You were aware of a visit in 2017, correct?
Yes.
And you were aware that he was visited by agents of the CCP's Ministry of State Security, correct?
That's correct.
And they visited him at his home, correct?
That's correct.
And at that time his wife and daughter were still in China, correct?
I don't know.
And at that time you were aware, were you not, that he was the main target of CCP's Fox Hunt campaign, correct?
I was not working for him at that time yet.
My question was, were you aware?
Mr. Horton said, objection. Asked and answered.
The court said, you may answer.
I was not aware.
Were you aware that there was a campaign to coerce Mr. Gua to return to China?
Are you referring to a specific period, a specific year and...
Were you ever aware of that fact?
I was told.
What year was that?
2018.
And that is when you were working there, correct?
Yes.
And that is when he had security, correct?
Yes.
You were aware, were you not, that when he was visited by the CCP ministries, he was threatened?
Mr. Horton said, objection.
The court said, you may answer.
I don't remember being told that.
Do you recall being told that he was at risk of being kidnapped?
Mr. Horton said, objection. This is hearsay, Your Honor.
The court said, "Please step up."
Continued on next page. At sidebar.
The court said, "So I thought the lengthy stipulation covered this."
Mr. Horton said, "Yes, Your Honor. It's clearly being elicited to repeat that truth. The first problem with that, I think, is that the witness has established that she doesn't have personal knowledge of this. So the questions are all, were you told X about Y, the goal of getting in the truth of X and Y?"
The court said, "So she at some point learns that he was being targeted by the CCP. She said that."
Mr. Horton said, "Right. She said that she was told certain things. And it seems that they are trying to get the truth of those things in right here, and doing that by asking. And what did this other person who's not here tell you, what was that statement, to say that that statement is true?"
The court said, "So you're objecting on a hearsay ground."
Mr. Horton said, "I agree it's cumulative with the stipulation, as Your Honor said. But it's also..."
The court said, "No, I didn't say that."
Mr. Horton said, "Sorry. I wasn't trying to be cute. I must have misheard you."
Court said, No. That long statement is something that I'm sure the jury has not completely assimilated."
Mr. Horton said, "Fair enough. I really didn't mean to suggest anything. It is eliciting hearsay for the truth of that hearsay. They are asking. And who did this person, who's not identified, tell you, and what did they say, and what were those statements?"
Ms. Schrofa said, "I really do not care at all if it's true or not. All I want to show is she knew all of this and then decided that the only reason he had security is because it sounded better to call them security than to call them handymen. That is my only point here."
Mr. Horton said, "So there's testimony in the record sufficient to allow Ms. Schroff to make a point that she just said she wants to make. The point of this barrage in these questions is for the truth of the statements."
The court said, "Well, you took pains to try to make it appear that there wasn't a legitimate, authentic security apparatus in place. And so now she's trying to establish that there was."
Mr. Horton said, "It is still hearsay. And if she goes and does the next thing, correct. Like, we may or may not object to the way that comes in. But right now we're on this series of hearsay statements that are coming in for their truth."
Ms. Schrofa said, "It's really not. Go ahead."
Mr. Comraju said, "I was just going to say, the witness testified she thought the security was bogus. We're allowed to elicit that she was told all these facts, that this undercuts her testimony the security is bogus. That's it."
The court said, "It is a form of impeachment, so I'm going to permit it."
Mr. Comraju said, "Thank you, Your Honor."
Continued on next page. In open court.
The court said, "Go ahead."
Pending question read. The witness said, "I don't remember. By Ms. Schrofa."
"And were you aware that ministers had come to his home from China and brought with them his wife and daughter?"
No.
"And were you aware that all of these instances were while Mr. Guo was living at the Sherry Netherlands?"
I only know of one instance.
"And you've already testified to that, correct?"
I did.
Okay. Now, let me just go back to my last set of questions. Do you recall if Mr. Bannon gave a talk in April 25th of 2019 at the Regis Hotel? Do you remember that talk?
I don't.
Okay. And do you recall being asked to order a book after that talk?
I don't.
And do you recall when you worked for Golden Spring? You were part and parcel of the people that Yvette would assign tasks to regarding purchases, correct?
Can you repeat the question, please?
You know, I'll do better. Do you recall Yvette asking you to purchase or put into place something called the Snack National Proposal? Do you remember that?
Can you repeat the name of the proposal?
Do you remember Yvette asking you to buy snack boxes for Golden Spring employees to make sure they were healthy?
Yes.
Okay. And do you remember working with somebody named Tamara Flores, correct?
I don't remember.
Yvette chose the snack box and told you to order them, correct?
Yes.
And you ordered them, right?
I did.
That was your job, right?
I ordered the boxes.
May 29th, 2018 is when Max Krasner was on board to Golden Spring, correct? Do you remember that?
I don't remember the date.
But you remember when he joined, right?
I remember it was 2018.
Right. And to onboard him, there were certain steps that you needed to take, correct?
I don't remember that.
Okay. Do you recall Yvette asking you to make sure that you had set up stationery with his name on it?
I don't.
Do you remember her asking you to make sure that the floor lights were moved and his desk was cleaned?
I don't remember.
Do you remember somebody named Rich Wojcicki, WJCICKI?
Yes.
And do you remember booking his travel in 2018?
I do, vaguely.
Right. You remember booking his flights and his hotel, correct?
I believe I booked his flight.
That was part of your job, right?
I was asked to do that.
I'm sorry?
I was asked to do that.
That was part of your job description, correct?
It was not part of my job description, but I did it.
There was a deposition in South Carolina, correct? Remember that?
I don't.
Gov't versus Lin. Mr. Gov't brought an action, a civil action. Do you remember that?
I don't.
Do you remember that you made travel arrangements for that trip?
I don't.
Do you remember that a translator was needed at that trip and you were not the translator taken?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, "You may answer."
I don't remember.
Do you remember Una Wilkinson being the translator that was taken because your Mandarin was not good enough?
The court said, "Sustained."
Do you remember attending meetings with Jennifer Mercurio?
I don't remember attending meetings with her. We were colleagues.
And Ms. Mercurio was on the board, correct? Actually, I take that back. She was general counsel and corporate secretary to Rule of Law Society, correct?
Yes.
And do you recall Ms. Mercurio saying that there would be a telephonic meeting on September 3rd of 2019, correct? Do you remember getting an email about that?
I don't.
Do you remember getting an email about Gov't Media's fundraising drive and the budget?
I don't.
And do you remember that there came a point when Ms. Mercurio stated that your role in Rule of Law Society was limited?
I didn't hear the last part.
Was limited. Your role was limited.
I don't know that she said that.
Do you recall getting an email saying that you would not be involved in the operation of Rule of Law Society?
I do not.
Do you remember being told that while you were on the board, you were not involved in the day-to-day operations of the entity? Do you not recall that?
I don't recall that.
All right. Well, let me show you something that might help you refresh your recollection. Ms. Strofa said, "Your Honor, may I approach?"
The court said, "You may."
Ms. Strofa said, "Thank you. Please don't read it out loud, but I can direct you to the bottom of the first page."
Mr. Horton said, "Is there a question pending?"
The court said, "Go ahead."
Ms. Strofa said, "I was waiting for the witness to finish reading, Your Honor."
I'm done.
Okay. And does that refresh your recollection that you were informed that you would not be involved in the operation of Rule of Law?
It does not.
It does not refresh your recollection?
It doesn't.
Was it your practice to read emails that you were sent?
Yes.
And it was your practice to respond to emails that were sent to you, correct?
That's correct.
And if you got an email that said you were going to be left off an email chain here on forward, is it likely that you would remember that?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, "Sustained."
Is it fair to say, ma'am, that you have 2 master's degrees?
Yes.
You have 1 master's in Chinese literature, correct?
Yes.
1 in linguistics, correct?
Applied linguistics, right.
Right. And before you took the job at Golden Spring, where did you work?
In China.
And after your job at Golden Spring, you set up what is something called Kai Enterprise. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And after that, you testified yesterday that you work at Google Search, correct?
Google.
Google, right? Are you a full-time employee at Google?
No.
You don't have a desk at Google, correct?
No, I work from home.
You do not have full-time employment with them, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. You've done work for the FBI, have you?
Through a company, correct.
I'm sorry?
Through a company.
Okay. So through a company you did freelance work for the Federal Bureau of Investigations, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And that's the same Federal Bureau of Investigations that was present during your prep, correct?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor." Relevance.
The court said, "Overruled."
No.
Is there a different Federal Bureau of Investigations that you did freelance work for?
It was a different unit.
Was a different unit, but it's still the same company, the FBI, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And if the FBI were to give you a freelance job now, you would do it, correct?
I don't know.
Okay, fair enough. Is it fair to say that you told these prosecutors that Mr. Gua's ego was the most important thing to Mr. Gua?
Yes.
And you said, did you not, to these people, that Mr. Gua was all about Mr. Gua, correct?
Yes.
You told them you saw no good in Mr. Gua, correct?
That is not correct.
Really? Okay. And you said that you could be a character witness about Mr. Gua. That's what you told this team, correct?
No.
You did not tell them that you could be a character witness about Mr. Gua?
Mr. Horton said, asked and answered.
The court said, sustained.
Ms. Schrofa said, Your Honor. Do you remember saying that?
Mr. Horton said, asked and answered.
The court said, sustained.
Ms. Schrofa said, Okay. May I just have 3,525 to refresh her recollection?
The court said. She did not say that she did not recall. She said no.
Ms. Schrofa said, Your Honor, the government objected to that question as asked and answered.
The court said. The answer she gave was no.
You told this team that you felt that they were more on your side than anything else, correct?
No, that's not correct.
You did not say that to them when you met with them.
The court said, sustained. She's already answered the question.
During your meetings with the United States Attorney's Office, and I mean Mr. Horton, Mr. Finkel, Ms. Murray. Mr. Ferguson, you made it clear that you did not think well of Mr. Gua, correct?
That's not correct.
You called him a man with an ego, correct?
I did.
And a man all about himself, correct?
That's correct.
And you think well of people like that? Is that your testimony?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, sustained.
Ms. Schrofa said, nothing further.
The court said, all righty members of the jury, even though it is only 11:23. We'll take our break now and you'll come back at noon. Remember that you're not permitted to discuss the case amongst yourselves. Don't permit anyone to discuss it in your presence.
Jury not present.
The court said you may step down. And don't discuss your testimony.
Witness not present.
The court said you may be seated. Is there anything that either party would like to raise before we break?
Mr. Finkel said, just very briefly, Your Honor. Just for the record. Ms. Maistrello's direct examination was approximately an hour and 40 minutes, give or take. The cross-examination has been about 3 hours and 15 minutes, give or take. Obviously, we've been objecting. And Your Honor has largely sustained sort of questions that just repeat the answers with some exasperation or, oh, really, which are kind of argumentative and are delaying the proceedings. We'll continue to object to those, of course. Just generally, Your Honor. The government's estimate with respect to this trial was based on what we understood to be reasonable crosses. I think generally the rule of thumb is about it depends on the witness, obviously, but if direct is an hour. Usually cross is around half an hour, sometimes more, sometimes less. Sometimes witnesses require a one-to-one. But from 1 hour and 42 minutes to 3 hours and 20 minutes, it's a lot, and I think it's a lot of repeating. So we just want to make our record on that.
The court said, I'm waiting for a response.
Ms. Schrofa said, Your Honor, I apologize. But I don't think Mr. Finkel's comments were inviting a response, and I don't have one. The cross was the cross. And, you know, Mr. Finkel, if he thinks my cross was bad, can certainly bring it up at the 2255 proceeding. But I will do my best, and I did do my best to do the cross I wanted to do.
The court said, so the only criticism that I heard was that it was too lengthy because there were repetitive questions. And there were repetitive questions. And so I'd like you to eliminate repetitive questions.
Ms. Schrofa said, I will do my best, Your Honor.
The court said, all righty. We'll break.
Luncheon recess. Continued on next page. Afternoon session 12 p.m. Jury present.
The court said, "You may be seated." Redirect.
Redirect examination. By Mr. Horton.
Good afternoon, Ms. Maistrello.
Good afternoon.
At the end of cross-examination, you were asked some questions about past work you've done for the FBI. Right?
Correct.
Did you do any work for the FBI on this case?
No.
Did you do any work for anybody on this case?
No.
At a high level, could you describe the past work you've done for the FBI?
It was mainly interpretation, transcription, and translation.
You were also asked questions about meeting with the government. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Did the government tell you what to say in your testimony, Ms. Maistrello?
No.
What, if anything, did the government tell you to do when you testified?
The only thing I was told is to be truthful.
And have you done that?
I have.
Ms. Maistrello. You testified yesterday that Yvette Wong asked you in your job interview whether you had any connections to the CCP. Do you remember that?
I do.
The court said, "Mr. Horton, if you would please bring the microphone up closer to you."
Mr. Horton said, "Yes, Your Honor." After Yvette asked you if you had any connections to the CCP, what was her response when you told her that you knew CCP members when you were in China?
She said, "Oh, don't worry, I'm a party member too."
And what did you understand Yvette to mean when she said she was a party member?
I understood that she was a member of the party.
And what, if anything, did Miles Gov't say about Yvette being a member of the CCP?
We didn't talk about that much, but sometimes he would joke about it.
And how would he joke about it?
Well, considering the fact that he was fighting against the CCP, Miles would bring up the joke and say, "Oh, you know, Yvette, she's also a party member."
You were asked questions today about whether you remembered being chastised by Miles Gov't. Do you remember those questions?
I do.
When, if ever, Ms. Maistrello, did Miles Gov't chastise you?
I don't remember.
And when, if ever, did Miles Gov't chastise your colleagues?
Ms. Shrofa said, "Objection as to which colleagues."
The court said, "You may answer."
I don't remember.
Generally speaking, how did Miles Gov't treat the people who worked for him?
It highly depended on his mood, so when he was in a good mood, he treated people kindly. When he was in a bad mood, then less kindly.
And what kinds of things would make him in a bad mood?
Things that were not being done like he wanted to.
And what would happen when things weren't being done the way Miles Gov't wanted them to be done?
When things were done properly, then he was happy.
And what would happen when he was unhappy?
He would usually yell.
What kind of things would he say when he yelled?
That we're stupid, we don't know, we're incompetent.
And how often did that happen?
Quite often.
How often, if ever, were people fired by Miles Gov't?
Very often.
And for what kinds of reasons?
Various reasons. Sometimes he didn't like them. Sometimes he didn't like what they looked like or what they were wearing, what they were doing.
You testified, Ms. Maistrello, that you were involved with Miles Govt's move to Connecticut in 2020. Do you recall that?
I recall that.
And you also testified that there were times you were told to pay for things when you worked for Miles Govt. Is that right?
Ms. Shrofa said, "Objection." She was told. That's not the testimony.
The court said, "Overruled. You may answer."
Yes.
When, if ever, Ms. Maistrello, were you directed not to pay for something?
It happened several times. Yvette would tell me, "We're not satisfied with this. Don't pay this vendor."
How much did that move that you were involved in planning to Miles Govt's home in Connecticut? How much did it cost?
Approximately $100,000.
And what, if anything, were you told to do with that $100,000 bill for the movers?
Initially I was told not to pay it, then I was told to ask for discount.
And why were you told not to pay the $100,000 bill?
Ms. Shrofa said, "I have a hearsay objection, Your Honor."
The court said, "Sustained."
What was your reaction when you were told not to pay the bill?
Ms. Schrofa said, objection as to relevance.
The court said, you may answer.
I wanted to understand the reasons why I was asked that.
Who told you not to pay that bill?
Yvette did.
And what was the reason Yvette gave you for not paying the $100,000 bill?
Ms. Schrofa said, objection to the hearsay.
The court said, you may answer.
I was told that they did not do a good job. That some items were damaged during the move.
And how did you react to being told to not pay that bill?
I knew that nothing was damaged because we had a team on site supervising the movers. So I didn't really understand why I was asked to do that.
You testified that there were other times you were told not to pay for things?
Yes.
What was the reason, as you understood it, you were told not to pay for things?
Reasons varied. In general, I was told that we're not satisfied with this vendor.
Mr. Horton said, may I have one moment, Your Honor?
The court said yes.
Mr. Horton said, thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Maistrello. You were asked questions on cross-examination about whether you knew the source of the funds for Sriracha and Golden Spring. Do you remember that?
I do.
What was the source of the funds that paid for N95 masks to be sent to Miles Gua's home at the beginning of COVID?
That was rule of law organizations.
And where did rule of law get its money from?
From donors.
Mr. Horton said, nothing further.
The court said, recross within the scope? Recross-examination.
By Ms. Schrofa.
Tell us, would you, how does one become a member of the Chinese Communist Party?
You are chosen by the party, so you're being contacted directly by the party. It usually happens when you're in college or university.
Right. And it is the party that chooses the person to become a member of the CCP, correct?
That's correct.
To become a member of the CCP, you have to be a Chinese national, correct?
That's correct.
You have to be chosen by the CCP, and you're normally chosen at a young age, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection to scope, Your Honor.
The court said, you may answer.
Correct.
And Yvette was chosen as a young child, actually. Not child, as a teenager when she was then chosen to be a student in a foreign country, correct?
I don't know at what age she was chosen.
But you do know that she was chosen to be part of the CCP and then allowed to study in the Sorbonne. In France, correct?
Those two things don't necessarily have a connection. I know that she studied in France. And I know that she is a party member.
Right. And according to you, a person could not, actually, I take that back. There is no person that is able to say to the CCP, I won't join your party, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection. Beyond the scope.
The court said, sustained.
Isn't it fair to say that one would be at risk of harm if one did not remain in the CCP party?
Mr. Horton said, same objection, Your Honor.
The court said, sustained.
Ms. Schrofa said, Your Honor, may we approach?
The court said yes.
Continued on next page. At the sidebar.
Ms. Schrofa said, they opened this door, Your Honor, by asking if Yvette is a member of the CCP. There is clear testimony. And this expert, this person would know that once you are made a party member of the CCP, there's no withdrawing from the CCP. It's not a free organization where you say, bye-bye, I'm out. Yvette would have had no choice in remaining a member of the CCP. I'm allowed to explore the misimpression they have left that she had any connection to the CCP now, meaning 2018, 2019, 2020. All throughout the indictment. They decided to do this on recross. I am not being cumulative, I hope. And it is sorry.
The court said, why are you bringing out her CCP membership?
Mr. Horton said, it was a short interview. It was a fact that Yvette provided her in this limited information exchange. That was one of the items. And there was extensive cross-examination about what Ms. Maistrello did or didn't know about the organization.
Ms. Schrofa said, I specifically did not touch her being a member of the CCP. It's all over the 3,500 material. I did not touch it. I did not touch it on cross. There was no reason for them to bring it up on redirect. They have left this jury with the impression that this woman now, and while being a co-conspirator of Miles Gov't, was with the CCP. Because they want to show that Miles Gov't kept her employed and was close to a member of the CCP party person and therefore, he could not be anti-CCP, okay? They opened this door.
The court said, so then I'll let you ask a leading question or two that gets us to the point where I would expect her to say, no, you cannot be with the CCP.
Ms. Schrofa said, I should be able to explore that Yvette said to her what Yvette's position is. She is no longer supportive of the CCP because that's the impression they want to leave them with.
The court said, so then that makes two questions.
Ms. Schrofa said, well, it's a little bit longer, Your Honor. Because I have to flesh out what it takes to get out of the CCP. Okay, so you can't just say no to the CCP. Once you're chosen, you have to remain. There's no withdrawal steps. If you wanted to disavow the CCP, there are no steps to disavow the CCP.
The court said, okay, that's one question.
Ms. Schrofa said, and that Yvette made very clear that she was no longer now a member of the CCP.
The court said, two questions.
Ms. Schrofa said, well, that's three, but okay, I will try.
The court said, good.
Continued on next page. In open court.
Ms. Schrofa said, may I continue, Your Honor?
The court said, you may.
Ms. Schrofa said, thank you.
By Ms. Schrofa.
Once you're chosen to be a member of the CCP, you are not allowed to withdraw from the CCP, correct?
I don't know whether you're allowed to withdraw. I don't know the law. I don't know how that works.
When Ms. Wang worked with Mr. Gov't, she worked for causes that were anti-CCP, correct?
Not entirely.
Ms. Wang took steps that were supportive of the CCP, according to you?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Is it your testimony that Yanping Wang took steps that were supportive of the dictatorship of the Chinese Communist Party?
No.
Okay. So when she worked with Miles Gov't, she worked on causes that were anti-CCP, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection. Asked and answered.
The court said, you may answer.
Not necessarily.
Well, tell me, what do you mean by not necessarily?
The job that she was doing was not necessarily anti-CCP. She was doing her job. But she was not always a political activist.
Right. She was not a political activist, but she was never pro-CCP, correct?
She was never pro-CCP.
Now you testified on redirect that you and your colleagues were chastised by Mr. Gov't, correct?
I said he could be tough.
He yelled, you said, right?
He did.
Called you stupid, correct?
Yes.
Called you incompetent, correct?
He did.
He did that often, correct?
When he was mad.
Right. And when he walked around, he would just simply yell, disaster, disaster, wherever he went. Right?
I did not say that.
Okay. I didn't ask you if you said that. I asked you if you knew if he did that.
He did that sometimes.
Right. And when he did that, you were part and parcel of the people that he was speaking toward, correct?
Sometimes I was, sometimes I wasn't.
Okay. And as a result of that, is that what led you to quit, or was it your health, or was it both?
I quit for health reasons.
Okay. You testified about people he fired, right?
Yes.
He never personally fired a single person, correct?
He gave directions to fire.
You're aware of a single direction he gave to someone to get another person fired? You have personal knowledge of that?
Yes.
Really? Who?
You want to know who he asked to fire, who was fired? What's your question?
No, I'm asking you who you are aware he told to get fired. I'm asking about your personal knowledge, not what you heard from others.
He told me to fire some people.
Did you fire them?
I did.
You had the authority to fire people.
If boss asked me to, yes.
Okay. Who did you fire?
Several people.
Who?
Do you want the names?
Sure.
I don't remember the names. I remember the roles.
You don't remember the names of people you fired from a job?
I don't.
Okay. You talked about the move to Connecticut costing $100,000, correct?
Approximately.
Right. You didn't pay that bill, right?
I did not.
You had no authority ever to allow any payment, correct?
When I was asked to pay, I would pay.
No. When you were asked to pay, you would go to Yvette, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection. Argumentative.
The court said, would you clarify your question, please?
When you were asked to pay a bill, you would have to send the bill to either Max Krasner or Yvette. Correct?
The court said, are you referring to all bills?
Ms. Strofa said, yes, all bills.
It depended on the amount.
Right. And an amount of $100,000 you could not pay, correct?
That's correct.
You testified that you were told not to pay a bill because somebody was unhappy with a vendor, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you do not know sitting here today who that vendor was, right?
I do.
Really? Who was the vendor?
Mr. Horton said, objection to the really in the questions, Your Honor.
The court said yes. If you'd leave out the really.
Who was the vendor?
The movers.
What's the name?
Moving company. Broadway.
Broadway movers. Your testimony is Broadway movers were not paid. Is that your testimony?
My testimony is that Broadway movers were the movers.
Okay. Were they paid?
Ultimately, I don't know.
So you don't know if they were ultimately paid. So I'm assuming you don't know how much it is that they were quibbling about in terms of destruction of the property that was being moved. Correct?
Mr. Horton said, object to the form of that question, Your Honor.
The court said, are you asking whether she knows what discount amount was requested?
Ms. Strofa said, yes.
I don't remember.
Wasn't your furniture, right?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. The furniture that was being moved was not your furniture, right?
No.
Well, you don't know if the furniture had sentimental value, correct?
I know it did.
So the furniture that was damaged had sentimental value, and that's why there was a conversation about not paying the vendor. Is that your testimony?
I know that no furniture was damaged.
Did you inspect it?
Personally, I didn't.
Did you see it?
I was not there.
In fact, you don't even know what furniture they're talking about, correct?
I do know that.
What furniture was it?
I had a PDF document with hundreds of pages of furniture.
And which of those hundreds of pages of furniture was damaged, do you recall?
I do not.
Okay. Fair to say you didn't examine a single piece of furniture on that hundreds of pages of document. Correct?
I was not present during the move.
Right. And you just made a value judgment and decided the vendors should have in fact paid, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection. Objection, Your Honor.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
My colleagues who were present at the moves told me that nothing was damaged.
My question to you was, and let me repeat it, you made a value judgment without ever inspecting the damaged furniture. Correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection. Asked and answered.
The court said, sustained. Sustained.
You testified that Rule of Law Society paid for the N95 masks, correct?
One of the rule of law organizations.
Which one?
I don't remember.
You don't remember at all which organization, correct?
Mr. Horton said, objection. Asked and answered.
The court said, all right. So ask the question only once. Don't repeat the question.
You don't even remember how much the dollar amount was, right?
I do not.
You met with these prosecutors several times, correct?
I did.
And not once did you look up that dollar amount, right?
No.
Ms. Strofa said, I have nothing further.
The court said, all righty. I assume there's no redirect?
Mr. Horton said, nothing further.
The court said, good. Okay, so you may step out. Thank you. Witness.
Witness excused.